Chapter 5, and visit your dentist twice a year. A clean tooth never decays. Brush your teeth after every meal and visit your dentist twice a year. These slogans carry the faith of our people. It is said and believed that we have the best dentists in the world, that we have more toothbrushes and use more than any other people. Many agencies, from kindergarten to university, from town council to and through the governments of city, state, and nation, strive for the spread of dental knowledge and the enforcement of its discipline. For instance, the New York City subways cooperated some time ago with the Commissioner of Health by displaying the notice, "For sound teeth, balanced diet with vegetables, fruit, milk, brush teeth, visit your dentist regularly." Shirley W. Wynn, MD, Commissioner of Health. During the same time, the ether was filled and the magazine pages were crowded with advertising which told mouth chemistry is altered by a paste, a powder, or a gargle so as to prevent decay, that a special kind of toothbrush reaches all the crevices, that a particular brand of fruit, milk, or bread is rich in elements for tooth health. There were toothbrush drills in schools. Mothers throughout the land were scolding, coaxing, and bribing to get children to use the preparations, eat the foods, and follow the rules that were said to guarantee perfect oral hygiene. There was endless repetition of the slogan, "A clean tooth never decays." Meantime, there appeared a statement from Dr. Adalbert Fernald, curator of the Museum of the Dental School, Harvard University, that he had been collecting mouth casts of living North Americans of all racial derivations from blonde to black, from the most northerly Eskimos through Canada and the states south to the Yucatan. The best teeth and the healthiest mouth were found among people who never drank milk since they ceased to be suckling babes, and who never in their lives tasted or tested any of the other things which we usually recommend for sound teeth. These people, Eskimos not as yet influenced by white men, never used toothpaste, tooth powder, toothbrushes, mouthwash, or gargle. They never took any pains to cleanse their teeth or mouths. They did not visit their dentist twice a year or even once in a lifetime. Their food was exclusively meat. Meat, be it noted, is not mentioned as good for the teeth in the advertisement sponsored by the Commissioner of Health of the City of New York. End note. The poster to which this refers, and similar dental propaganda by the City of New York, disappeared from the subways in the 30s, but similar views have remained current. For instance, Dr. James Barton says in the "That Body of Yours" column of the New York Post for the November 30th, 1944, research dental workers, dentists, and physicians state that proper foods, particularly milk and milk products, and raw vegetables and fruits, prevent decay from the inside of the tooth. In his presentation, there is no reference to meat. Teeth superior on the average to those of the presidents of our largest toothpaste companies are found in the world today and have existed during past ages among people who violate every precept of current dentifrice advertising. Not all of them have lived exclusively on meat, but so far as an extensive correspondence with authorities has yet been able to show, a complete absence of tooth decay from entire populations has never existed in the past and does not exist now, except where meat is either exclusive or heavily predominant in the diet. Our Bellevue experiments threw a light on tooth decay, but the key to the situation lies more in the broad science of anthropology. I now give, by sample and by summary, things I personally known to me from anthropological fieldwork. I received my first anthropological commission from the Peabody Museum of Harvard University when they sent John W. Hastings and me to Iceland in 1905. We found there in one place a medieval graveyard that was being cut away by the sea. Skulls were rolling about in the water at high tide. At low tide, we gathered them and picked up the scattered teeth here and there. As wind and water shifted the sands, we found more and more teeth until there was a handful. We got permission to excavate the cemetery and eventually brought with us to Harvard a miscellaneous lot of bones, which included more than 80 skulls and a great many loose teeth. The collection has been studied by dentists and physical anthropologists without the discovery of a single cavity in even one tooth. So the Icelanders of the Middle Ages had no toothache, and none of that sloughing away of the teeth which is known as dental caries. The skulls in the Hastings Stefansson collection at the Harvard University represent persons of ordinary Icelandic blood. There were no Aborigines in that island when the Irish discovered it sometime before 800 AD. When the Norsemen got there after 1850, they found no people except the Irish. It is now variously estimated that in origin, the Icelanders are from 10% to 30% Irish, 60% to 80% Norwegian, the remainder chiefly from Scotland, England, Sweden, and Denmark. None of the peoples whose blood went into the Icelandic stock are racially immune to tooth decay, nor are the modern Icelanders. Then why were the Icelanders of the Middle Ages immune? An analysis of the various factors makes it pretty clear that it was their food which protected the teeth of the medieval Icelanders. The chief elements were fish, mutton, milk, and milk products. There was a certain amount of beef, and there may have been a little horse flesh, particularly in the earliest period of the graveyard. Cereals were little imported and might be used for beer rather than porridge. Bread was negligible, and so were all other elements from the vegetable kingdom, native or imported. When Hastings and I were in Iceland, many people remembered from the middle of the 19th century a period when bread was still more rare than caviar is in New York today. As children, they had tasted bread only a few times a year, usually when they went visiting with their parents. Thus, the diet was still substantially that of the Middle Ages, though the use of porridge was increasing. The older people with whom we talked did not remember hearing of a toothache in their early youth, but did remember accounts of it as a painful rarity about the time when the large immigration to North America started following 1872. Soon after arrival in the states, Utah, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Dakota, and in Canada, Nova Scotia, Manitoba, the Icelandic colonists became thoroughly familiar with the ravages of caries. In the United States and Canada, they had before 1900 at the latest teeth as bad as those of the average native-born American. There is, then, at least one known case of a North European people whose immunity from caries, to judge from the Peabody Museum collection and from common report, approached 100% for 1,000 years, down to 100 years ago. The diet was mainly from the animal kingdom. Now that Iceland's diet has become approximately the same as the average for the United States or Europe, Icelandic teeth show as high a percentage of decay. I began to learn about another formerly toothache-less people when I joined the Mackenzie River Eskimos in 1906. Some of them had been eating European foods in considerable amounts since 1889. Toothache and tooth decay were appearing, but only in the mouths of those who affected the new food secured from the Yankee whalers. The Mackenzie people agreed that toothache and tooth cavities had been unknown in the childhood of those then approaching middle age, while there were many of all ages still untouched, the ones who kept mainly or wholly to the Eskimo foods. Here and in other places, this diet is somewhere between 95% and 99% from animal sources, if measured in calories. The vegetable food is chiefly fresh berries, picked in the open during summer and eaten the same day. There are Eskimo districts, like parts of Labrador and of western and southwestern Alaska, where even before the coming of Europeans, considerable use was made of native vegetables. Probably, however, the vegetable element nowhere furnished as much as 5% of the average yearly caloric intake of the primitive Eskimo, even in the southwestern Alaska. Some northerly groups ate no vegetables. Dr. Ailes Herdlicka, the distinguished curator of anthropology in the National Museum, Washington, whose death was one of the chief losses to American science in 1943, wrote me shortly before that he had been able to verify no case of tooth decay among Eskimos of the present or the past who were uninfluenced by European habits. Dr. S.G. Ritchie of Dalhousie University wrote after studying the skeleton collection gathered by Dr. Diamond Jennis on my third expedition, "In all the teeth examined, there is not the slightest trace of caries." I brought about 100 skulls of Eskimos who had died before Europeans came in to the American Museum of Natural History, New York. These have been examined by many students, but no sign of tooth decay has yet been discovered. It seemed at one time that the record of the museum's collection would have to be degraded from its 100% rating, for Dr. M.A. Pleasure examined their 283 skulls said to be Eskimo of pre-European date and found a small cavity in one tooth. But when the records were checked, it turned out that the collector, the Reverend J.W. Chapman of the Episcopal Board of Missions, New York City, had sent that skull to the museum as one of an Athabasca Indian, not of an Eskimo. The Eskimo record is, therefore, clean to date. Not a sign of tooth decay has been discovered among that one of all people, which most completely avoids the foods, the precepts, and the practices favored for dental health by the New York Commissioner of Health, the average dentist, the toothbrush drill master of the schools, and the dentifrice publicist. Through correspondence and printed information, I have been able to discover in various museums throughout the world more than 800 skulls of men who are considered to have been during life exclusive meat eaters. Not one tooth in these skulls has yet been found that shows evidence of caries. Most of these are Eskimo skulls. There are included in this count of 800 some crania of Europeans who lived in Greenland during the Middle Ages, and the mentioned skulls from Iceland, as representative of people who supplemented their meat diet with milk and its products without losing their immunity to caries. The incidence of caries among civilized Eskimos who now eat a mixed diet is heavy. As has been said, they have no racial immunity to this disease. When addressing conventions and societies of medical men, I usually state the oral hygiene case somewhat as above, though in more detail. If there is rebuttal from the floor, it frequently takes the form of contending that the tooth health of primitive people is due to their chewing a lot and to their eating coarse foods. The advantage of that argument to the dentist whose best efforts have failed to save a patient's teeth is obvious. It gives him an out that not all your care, even when supported by his skill in science, can preserve teeth in the age of soft foods that give no exercise to the teeth and no friction to the gums. But it is deplorably hard to square anthropology with this comfortable excuse of the dentist. Among the best teeth of the mixed diet world are those of a few South Sea Islanders who as yet largely keep to their native diets. Similar or better tooth condition was described, for instance, from the Hawaiian Islands by the earliest visitors. But can you think of a case less fortunate for the chewing and coarse diet advocates? The animal foods of these people was mainly fish, and fish is soft to the teeth whether boiled or raw. Among the chief vegetable elements was poi, a kind of soup or paste. Then they used sweet potatoes and yams, not so very hard to chew either. It would be difficult to find a New Yorker or Parisian who does not chew more and use coarser food than the South Sea Islanders did on the native diets, which are said to have given them, in at least some cases, better than 90% freedom from caries, a record no block on Park Avenue can approach. There are several obvious reasons why those who never lived with pre-white Eskimos have commonly imagined and frequently stated that Eskimos chew a great deal, and that what they chew is coarse food that gives more massage to their gums than our food does to ours. The contention is that from such chewing and massage results the complete absence of dental caries reported by all observers from pre-white Eskimo communities. The fact, however, leads to an opposite conclusion as we see when we face them. People whose diet is in considerable part cereals and other things of vegetable nature almost necessarily chew much, or herbivorous animals chew a lot. Also, we are educated to chew. At least since 1897, we have been taught that painstaking mastication is good for us. We learned from physiology texts in the grade school that chewing should mix the saliva thoroughly with the food in the mouth, for digestion begins there. It is only the meticulous who differentiate between the various foods. These texts repeat the saw that valiant chewing is good for teeth and gums. Between the dentists and the Fletcherizers, we of today chew in part from a sense of duty. Analogizing carelessly to the primitive Eskimos, the usual textbook writer ignores that they have had no mastication coaching and begins by assuming as a minimum that they chew at least as much as we. Then he imputes to them further chewing on the basis of an assumed hardness and toughness of their food. For instance, dentifrice advertising shows us pictures of charming girls gnawing ham bones or legs of lamb. Underneath we read, "Terrible," say the social leaders. "Splendid," say the dentists. The argument proceeds that in an assumed previous age, people ate meat in the way illustrated by the charming girl, and that they developed and retained excellent teeth through much biting and chewing of tough and coarse victuals. These advertisers find it convenient to ignore the fact that man has been a tool-using animal from the first, and that carnivorous primitives have knives. The method of handling meat is about the same whether you're at the beef feast of the royalty and warriors of Ethiopia, as reported in the press and in books of travel, or at the caribou meals of the Stone Age Eskimos, as I saw them at the Coronation Gulf in 1910. In either place, you take a good-sized piece of meat in your left hand and a knife in the right. The knife may be anything from Sheffield steel through native copper to flaked stone. With your front teeth, you nip lightly into the edge of the piece of meat, just so you get a good hold, and then you cut in front of your lips. The piece is not likely to be larger than we might cut with a knife and a fork at a restaurant when dining politely on a sirloin. But no matter how tender the steak, a European chews the piece a good deal, as said, because he is in the chewing habit through being partly herbivorous and because he has been admonished to chew. The uncivilized Eskimo has never had practice in the herbivorous mastication, and his mother has never told him to chew for the good of his health. So he gives the piece a bite or two, rolls it around in his mouth once or twice, and swallows. He will, of course, chew efficiently should the piece feel as though it might be too large or too hard to be gulped down. This description, true of cooked meat, is truer for a greater reason with unfrozen raw flesh, which has in the mouth the feel of a raw oyster and slides down like an oyster, more readily in fact, for the oyster is likely to be a great deal larger and so more slithery than the piece of raw beef that you cut off for yourself. Raw fish is, if anything, still more like a raw oyster. Boiled fish is soft, though not so soft as if it were raw, so the Eskimo chews it just enough to get it covered with saliva. When you eat raw flesh in the Arctic during winter, whether it is mammal or fish, you nearly always eat it frozen. Animal tissue at anything like -50 degrees is like glass, so that if you drop a fish on a hard floor, it splinters. Red meat or fish at these temperatures resembles cast iron in that when you touch it, you freeze fast to it. If you were to give even the daintiest lick to a caribou ham at -50 degrees, you would lose a piece of tongue covering approximately the size of the area which came in contact with the ham. Obviously, that is not the kind of frozen food on which we breakfast. We let it lie around indoors until it gets about as soft as hard ice cream or frozen pudding. Then we cut it first into thickish slices and thereafter into smaller pieces, chewing each about as much as you would lumps of hard ice cream. Excepting tendons and connective tissue, no meat is tough unless cooked. When it is cooked, two main causes determine toughness: the age of the animal and the manner and extent of cooking. The chief food animal of the inland Eskimos is the caribou. With them, as with cattle, the older the beast, the tougher the meat. A young caribou is as fleet of foot as a heifer, an old one is as slow as a cow. The wolves get the clumsy old ones that drop behind when the band flees, and the Eskimos seldom have a chance to secure an animal that is more than 4 or 5 years old. Such young caribou are not tough, no matter how cooked. It is the wolves and not the Eskimos who get the tooth and gum benefit, if any, of chewing old caribou. I do not know a corresponding logical demonstration for seals, but I can testify from helping to eat thousands of them that their meat is never tough, at least not in comparison with the beefsteaks that you sometimes get in city chop houses. Then there are Eskimos who live almost exclusively on fish. As has been said, raw fish are so raw oysterish that you can't chew them. There is not much more chewing than were they eaten boiled. The only condition under which fish become tough, or rather hard, is when they are dried. Some Eskimos use dried fish sometimes, others never do. There is, for separated districts, a wide difference in the amount of Eskimo chewing, but no one has reported the health of teeth is better among the heavy chewers. How could it be when as yet no caries has been found, either among the lightest or heaviest masticators? As has been said, there is one kind of Eskimo food which gets a great deal of chewing: dried fish, or dried red meat. Some districts have never such dried food at all. Certain districts may have them one year and not another. There is no district where desiccated food is likely to represent more than 10% or 15% of the animal diet. It happens that the districts almost or quite the most given to drying their flesh foods are the ones which also have an appreciable quantity of vegetables. In Kotzebue Sound, Alaska, for instance, in the early days, dried fish and masu, knotweed roots, preserved in oil, were likely to be served at the same meal. The fish would take a good deal of chewing, and the roots a great deal. This heavy use of the teeth on food which at times had much sand in it wore them down to the gums when people grew middle-aged, but no alveolar abscesses were produced, for reasons dealt with below. Nor was there tooth decay due to the introduction of carbohydrates from the roots. Seemingly not enough starch was contributed by them for that result. These dry fish and masu root eaters, worn of tooth and perhaps a bit unsightly for that, were just as free from caries as the 100% flesh eaters. Many Eskimos now eat a good deal of food similar to ours and therefore chew more than they used to. The communities nearest us in diet have the worst teeth, some as bad as ours. It is a second line of defense for the heavy mastication advocates that even if Eskimos perhaps do not chew their food so much, they do chew skins a great deal. The chewing of leather is, however, far less than one might believe from what has been said by a particular kind of writer and pictured in certain movies. In any case, skin chewing is done mainly by the women, and it is not easy to see how the wife's chewing would preserve her husband's teeth. Once at a talk to a medical group, I encountered a further argument. Was it not true that Eskimo men use their teeth a great deal in their crafts? Do they not bite wood, ivory, or metal, or hold, pull out, twist, and so on? The best reply I could think of was to agree that Eskimos pull nails with their teeth, and to follow by suggesting that it is more likely that they bite nails because they have good teeth, rather than that they have good teeth because they bite nails. There are several reasons why the teeth of many Eskimos wear down rapidly. By some anatomical cause, their front teeth usually meet edge to edge, while ours frequently overlap, and direct opposition tends to cause wear. Some Eskimos wind dry fish or red meat, and sand gets in and to an extent acts like sandpaper. Both sexes, but especially men, use their teeth for biting on hard materials. Both sexes, but especially women, use their teeth for softening skins. A wearing towards the pulp may, therefore, take place in the early midlife. What happens is stated by Dr. Ritchie, previously quoted, with relation to the Coronation Gulf Eskimos as they were before 1918. Coincidence with this extreme wear of the teeth that the dental pulps have taken on their original function with conspicuous success. Sufficient new dentine of fine quality has been formed to obliterate the pulp chambers and in some cases even the root canals of the teeth. This new growth of tissue is found in every case where access to the pulp chambers has been threatened. There has therefore been no destruction of the pulps through infection, and consequently alveolar abscesses were apparently unknown. So total absence of caries from those who live wholly on meat is definite. Cessation of decay when you transfer from a mixed to a meat diet happens usually, perhaps always. The rest of the picture is not so clear. Caries has been found in the teeth of mummies in Egypt, Peru, and in our own Southwest. These semi-ancient peoples were mixed diet eaters, depending in considerable part on cereals. Their teeth were better than ours, though not so good as those of the Eskimos. It appears that if you want a dental law, that you can approximate it by saying that the most primitive people usually have the best teeth, but that no people of the past or present are known who had complete freedom from tooth decay unless they were hunting, fishing, pastoral in their way of life, and got little or none of their food direct from the vegetable kingdom. You might add that in some cases, a highly vegetarian people, while not attaining the 100% perfection of meat eaters, do nevertheless have a very good teeth as compared with ours. However, those partly immune vegetarians would not be those who go in heavily for agriculturalist food like rice, wheat, oats, corn, and sugar. Rather, they would be heavy eaters of what seriously as well as humorously we might call monkey food, the things to eat which are discoverable in tropical forests by ape or primitive man, such as fruits, shoots, tubers, and succulent plants. Incidentally, the definite correlation of tooth decay, which the eating of starches and sugars makes any cavities discovered in the teeth of skeletons exhumed by archaeologists a clue to a former way of life. Men, it is universally assumed, were in the earliest stages hunters and gatherers. Later, they became herdsmen and farmers. The change from hunter to herdsman did not bring with it the decay of teeth. The change to farming did. A skeleton with a decayed teeth is therefore presumably that of a farmer, or at least the victim of an agricultural civilization. For in most parts of the world, gatherers would have a time finding enough carbohydrates with which to ruin their teeth. It is contended by the Hawaiian Sugar Planters Association Health Research Project that the shift from good to execrable teeth among the mixed diet Polynesians has been due to a change from the native taro and yam to cereals. I have seen no comment of theirs upon the doubtless great increase of sugar consumption, which has been at least as synchronic with the deterioration of Hawaiian teeth as the shift from yams to cereals. On the strength of the view that the diet is the greatest factor in saving teeth, the anthropologists have been getting support from experiments conducted by institutions and by scattered students. Some dentists are here contributing notably to a research and to a campaign of education that seem bound to deplete their income. My probing has not revealed thus far corresponding unselfishness among the dentifrice manufacturers. To sum up, any people who eat vegetables, even the softest, anyone who eats bread or leafy vegetables, is bound to chew a good deal more than the average for carnivorous people. Yet the Eskimos, or meat eaters comparable to the Eskimos, and pastoral people like the medieval Icelanders, all of them mastication slackers, are the only ones ever found in present or former times who can show 100% freedom from caries. There is, accordingly, in the study of such diets and habits of life, no aid or comfort for those who believed that the decadent teeth of our civilization are a result of decreasing chewing. Those who seek explanations for the relative soundness of the teeth of hunting and pastoral man as compared with those of the eaters of mixed diets have suggested that the temperature at which the food is eaten may have something to do with it. Certainly there are a few differences more striking than those between the usual temperatures at which the Eskimos and we eat and drink. In the drinking of water, the primitive Eskimo was about even with those of us who usually chill our drinks. In summer, he would dip fresh water off the surface of sea ice or would drink from rivers which, although by no means ice cold, were on the average colder than ours. In winter, when he melted snow or ice, he would usually put snow or ice back in his water before drinking if it was appreciably warm. In warm drinks, the difference was striking. He had nothing to be compared with the tea and coffee that many of us gulp almost scalding hot. He did have broths to correspond to our soups. We like them almost as hot as our tea, but he would set his aside to cool down to what we think of as lukewarm. There is the same difference in cooked food. We like our meats almost as hot as our drinks, and so with baked and boiled potatoes and many other things. But the Eskimo housewife was not supposed to offer a piece of meat to a guest or to a member of the family until by repeated touching she had ascertained that it was nearly the temperature of her hand. True, this rule was not always observed, particularly when appetites were keen, where children or others of small patience were concerned. It was not true, as implied by the usual northern movie and by some writers, that Eskimos preferred to eat their food raw. A few things were preferred raw, among them seal liver, but most were preferred boiled or roasted, and if they were eaten raw, it was usually for convenience. Still, it is true that the Eskimos ate wholly uncooked meats more frequently than we do. On the Nona coast of Alaska and of western Arctic Canada, on our first expedition, 1906 to 07, and again on the second expedition, 1908 to 1912, we saw among the local Eskimos the transition from their methods of cooking and eating to ours. Even in 1906, there were a few who drank very hot tea, and those were proud of the accomplishment. The rest were something like people learning to eat green olives, proud of each slight advance in ability to tolerate the new experience. It was striking that in the early years of eating of very hot foods and the drinking of very hot drinks was strictly confined to the ones introduced by the whites. The same man who drank his tea nearly scalding, with seeming enjoyment, would be as careful as he ever had been that his broth should be lukewarm. Those who ate donuts piping hot from the grease would see to it that a chunk of boiled caribou was cooled nearly down to body temperature. Boiled meat was taken usually at temperatures between 110 and 130 degrees Fahrenheit. It was explained some pages back that frozen meat was usually thawed to about the consistency of rather hard ice cream, thus to somewhere between 32 and 20 degrees Fahrenheit. I was so used to thinking of these meats as resembling ice cream in temperature and texture that it never occurred to me, so far as I can now remember, that one would feel materially colder than the other against teeth, tongue, or palate. Seemingly, there is a difference, and a logical one when you come to think of it. Inspector A.T. Belcher of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police tells me that Eskimo prisoners in his charge who liked the taste of ice cream complained that it felt too cold in the mouth. This interested him, and he inquired carefully of several Eskimos, making informal experiments, getting them to eat both ice cream and frozen meat at the same meal or under similar circumstances. They stuck to it that the ice cream felt colder than the frozen meat. Upon trial, the inspector's own observation agreed with theirs. Given the fact that Belcher experiment, a theory to explain it comes to mind at once. Ice cream is a better conductor than frozen meat. It is a somewhat better conductor than lean meat muscle tissue and a much better conductor than suet. The Belcher trials within the mouth cavity can be checked with experiments on one's own skin. Put one of your bare feet into ice water at the same time as you put the other into a bucket of snow. The shock of the ice water will be more severe because water is a better conductor than snow. The Icelanders, as previously shown, a sedentary pastoral group of ancestry derived from Scandinavia and Ireland, were until the early part of the century as free from caries as the nomadic hunting Eskimos who are of Mongolian stock, one kind of North American Indian. It happens that in the matter of hot foods and drinks, there was in Iceland about the same kind of change as among the northern Canadian Eskimos at the time when caries began to appear. The drinks of the Icelanders had been milk, whey, and to a small extent beer. They resembled the average European and differed from the Eskimo and modern American in that they drank relatively little cold water. Their milk was sometimes heated, but there was nothing to correspond with the large volume of hot liquid which began to be taken when the coffee habit developed in the first half of the 19th century. There was probably also at least a slight increase during the same period in the eating of cooked foods, and probably the very custom of drinking hot coffee tended to increase the taste for higher temperatures in food generally. Still, it is clear that before the introduction of coffee, the Icelanders consumed far more hot food than did the Eskimos prior to the introduction of tea. We do not have, then, as to the change in food and drink temperatures, either with the Eskimo or with the Icelanders, the clarity of a test under laboratory conditions. Among the Eskimos, sugar and starch were being introduced as well as new forms of protein during the period when tea and hot foods were being introduced. So that shift from approximately 100% meat diet to a mixed diet and the shift from colder to warmer foods and drinks both coincided with the beginning and then the rapid decrease of dental caries. The same double and overlapping correspondence held true, though to a lesser degree, when the Icelanders were shifting from a diet which had been chiefly mutton, fish, and milk to one higher in sugar, starch, and proteins of vegetable origin. Although there is probably no racial difference, there certainly is a considerable individual difference with regard to tooth decay. While it seems that Eskimos, Scots, and Zulus have caries about in relation to the chemistry of the food they eat, if large numbers are averaged, it is equally true that members of a single household, through blood relatives who appear to eat nearly the same food, may differ greatly in the soundness of their teeth. Thus, the only thing which matters greatly with regard to the health of the teeth is the chemical composition of the diet, The higher percentage of carbohydrates, the lower percentage of animal proteins and fats, the greater the tooth decay. However, pending further study, it is better to be a little cautious here and say that while we do know that the diets of which the calories were derived 95% or more from animal fats and animal proteins will guarantee against caries, we do not know for sure that a 75% meat diet with 25% of carbohydrates is much better for the teeth than one that is 50% meat, the other 50% carbohydrates. It may be that one would have to confine himself to meats, supplemented if desired by dairy foods and eggs if he wanted to be sure to avoid the dentist. There are scientists, among others, Professor L.M. Waugh of the School of Dental and Oral Surgery of Columbia University, who are of the opinion that while carbohydrates produce tooth decay, the starches among them are relatively innocent, their practically exclusive villains being the sugars. This is a little hard to reconcile with the common view that upon digestion, starch turns into sugar. Still, there is at least a ground for suspending a blanket judgment against all of the carbohydrates, lest some be found in deeper sin than others. It has been pointed out, for instance, by Dr. Collins, who is quoted below, that the incidence of caries seems to be heavier among those primitive peoples who get their starches from cereals than among those who get them from sweet and Irish potatoes. There appears little reason to doubt what has already been said, that there were people in the South Sea Islands who had a considerable starch percentage in their diet obtained from things like yams and poi, and who nevertheless had better teeth than the corn eaters of the North American Pueblo region or the small grain eaters of the Babylonia and ancient Egypt. It may be said, perhaps, that the possibility of protecting the teeth by selecting the diet is not an established fact, but merely a theory held by a few. Now, there is a profession which devotes itself to the study of mankind, with special reference to such things as human skeletons, of which the teeth are an important part. This profession of anthropology seems nearly unanimous in agreement with the main contentions of this chapter. They have a sort of official clearinghouse for the United States and an organization of high standing by worldwide comparison in the Smithsonian Institution of Washington. We have already quoted its curator of physical anthropology, Dr. Ailes Hrdlicka, to the effect that he did not know of a single decayed tooth in any skeleton of a man who had lived chiefly or exclusively by hunting and who had died before European foods were introduced. We quote now Henry B. Collins, senior ethnologist of the Bureau of American Ethnology of the Smithsonian, from a letter dated August 10, 1939. In this letter, Collins refers to the idea that chewing hard, tough, or coarse foods will keep the teeth sound and terms it an old wives' tale. He says that by his own observation, Eskimos who have the soundest of teeth are more likely to gulp than to chew their food, which is chiefly boiled or raw meats. He goes on, the hard chewing hypothesis to explain sound teeth seems at best an impediment and a distraction from the main issue, which is the extremely important role of diet in the formation and condition of the teeth. It would not be difficult to point to other examples of an inverse relationship between vigorous chewing and good teeth. Consider the prehistoric Indians of coastal Florida who, to judge from the skulls in the National Museum, had fully as robust jaws and almost as perfect teeth as the Eskimo, and yet their practical food were oysters and other shellfish, which surely required little chewing. Their immunity from dental caries and the splendid development of their teeth and bones in general is, to my mind, a condition directly correlated with their diet. For consider, on the other hand, that without exception, every prehistoric or modern Indian population that depended to any extent on grain agriculture shows susceptibility to dental caries. I base this generalization also on the extensive skull collections in the National Museum. From the examination of these collections, I have the definite impression that there is a rather close correlation between dental ills and grain consumption. The more intensive the agriculture, the higher the incidence of caries. At one end of the scale are the Pueblos, prehistoric and modern, whose worship of the corn deity has not prevented them from having the most wretched teeth of any American aborigines. Dental decay is also much in evidence among the eastern and southern Indians, mostly inland who also were agriculturalists. The California Indians, mostly acorn eaters, also have quite bad teeth. Ascending the scale somewhat, we find that the prehistoric plains tribes, for example, the Arikara, who practice agriculture to some extent, show some caries, while later plains Indians of whatever group who have given up agriculture for a nomadic hunting life have splendid teeth. There has been as yet no excitement in the newspapers over the discovery or the alleged discovery that no one has caries who lives on meat, whether or not supplemented by milk and milk products. But every now and then there is a furor because of a community who... But every now and then there is a furor because a community has been located where no one has caries, allegedly because of a special chemical composition of the water. This seems to mean that people are not interested in protecting their teeth by changing their food, but they're interested in protecting them by changing their drinking water. This may be one more case of a fundamental subconscious wisdom in mankind. For if we face the issue whether to protect our teeth by an all-meat diet, serious questions arise among them. Teeth are only teeth. A good set comes in handy, but there are not many who fear the dentist so that they would care to make avoiding him the chief concern in life. False teeth individually or by the set are getting better, and the advertisers claim they are so cheap now that practically anyone should be able to afford a complete outfit of uppers and lowers. Meat is costly. Ask the butcher the price of 6 pounds of lean sirloin steak and a pound of suet, for that is about what you will need if you work hard through a long day on an exclusive meat diet. You could do with cheaper cuts, but many of them are bony and you would require more pounds of them. Finally, if we all started living on meat to protect our teeth or some other reason, we would soon come to the end of the world's resources. The most fundamental of all the reasons why it is better to live on pork and corn pone than pork by itself is that if we first feed the corn to a pig and then eat the pig, we waste something like 6/7 or 7/8 of the food value of the corn, not thinking for the moment of vitamins, minerals, and things of that sort, but merely of caloric value. There are, of course, many other good reasons why the world is not about to become one federation of carnivora, among them religious prohibitions, as in India, mixed diet beliefs, established food habits. The main thing is that it could not be done anyway, for we should not be able to produce enough meat in the world, at least not by old-fashioned methods such as ranching cattle or hunting moose. This does not, however, lessen the academic interest of considering how things are and what follows when one omits from his diet sugars, starches, and all that comes direct from the vegetable kingdom, living on meat either exclusively or in combination with things like eggs and milk. A part of what follows is that this meat eater will then have teeth which remain sound throughout the longest life, and that he will visit the dentist, if at all, only for cosmetic purposes, and of course for troubles like pyorrhea, for it is only caries and perhaps malformed jaws and impacted teeth that one avoids by avoiding carbohydrates.